gonna wear the shoes off. Yeah. Feeling it? Oh, you got an extra? Oh. Oh. No, it's on you. That's good. Oh, yeah. We're good. We started, right? I'm sure Brian's got one somewhere, but
Sonanos. It's Spanish for heal us. I don't know why I picked the Spanish. Because I wanted a cooler title than heal us.
I don't even know what I said.
Something very... something. Doesn't matter, dude.
Yeah.
Nobody does.
Even in America.
Doesn't count. Speak American. Should we start it?
Sure. Ready for this? Yeah, we're gonna start. We're doing it. We're doing it. I know it's not quite 15 after, but. All right. me show you what I can do. I'll raise you up, and I'll heal all your pain, overflow your cup, and I will give you the strength, to outrun the rain. You know we'll outrun the rain. Outrun the rain. No, we'll outrun the rain. I won't stop the rains from falling, but I'll be your shelter whenever you need. But when the shackles of life got you crawling, I'll be there to set you free. I'll raise you up. I'll heal all your pain, overflow your cup, and I'll give you the strength, outrun the rain. No, we'll outrun the rain. Outrun the rain. No, we'll outrun the rain. Just open your heart wide, and I'll be by your side. Yes, I will. Can nothing shall you fear, 'cause I'll always be outrun the rain. You know we'll outrun the rain. Outrun the rain. You know we'll outrun the in this place, but not only in this place. Light that shines on all people. Too broken and too far outside.
not from this life, but for this life. Come on. A love from which nothing can separate us. Or anyone or anything in all of creation. The salt of the earth and light of the world. Seeking to be a benefit and a blessing to all the world.
Heal me, healer, take me nearer. Lead us like the lightning lights the night, and chase us with a lover's hopeful sigh. Hallelujah. Sing it to ya. I hope it moves ya, make it right. Make it right. Solemn call, we hear her. From deep in the soul, believers. Lead us like the lightning lights the night, and chase us with a lover's hopeful sigh. Hallelujah. Sing it to ya. I hope it moves ya. Make it right, 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 make it sing it to ya. Hope it moves ya to make it right. Make it right.
Solomon's Porch seems to be a little angsty, pouty, and hard to understand. It's because we're 13 today. It's our 13th anniversary, so we like to mark ourselves in ages of children. So there's a couple of 13-year-olds in the room that would tell you how old we are as a church. And we love 13-year-olds because we are one. So nothing wrong with that. But it was 13 years ago on this first Sunday in January. Then it was January 2nd that we had our first gathering. So if you're here for your first time, you're just like the rest of us, just on a 13-year rhythm. In fact, how many of you were in the room at our first gathering 13 years ago? How many of you were with us? Yeah, like still some. And then all the rest have come since then. So we're terribly glad to have you, and it's been a great adventure. We don't do a lot of like anniversaries and big memories and all that kind of stuff. So we probably should at some point. Maybe like our 20th anniversary, we'll make a big deal out of it or something like that. But one of the things we've done almost every single Sunday night is consume a lot of bread, wine, and juice, because we've done communion every week. And we've done it in lots of different ways with who introduces it and how it goes. We're now in a rhythm where different people get to sign up to introduce communion every week. And they tell communion either from their perspective, what they like about it, what we do. They sometimes just give instructions. We read a little thing. And different people do that each week. If you would like to be one of those people, there's a little sign-up sheet where you get to do that. So just feel free to offer. And Tommy Olson is our guy tonight. So that's sort of an awkward transition. But anyway, Tommy's our communion guy. And I will mention that our 6-1-2 group, which is 6th graders to 12th graders, after communion's done tonight, you've got a little get-together downstairs. Now that's something we didn't do back 13 years ago. We didn't have 6th graders through 12th graders, but now we do. So anyway, after communion's done, 6th graders through 12th graders, you can hook up with Bo downstairs.
One of the things that separates the church from just a typical gathering of friends is that we celebrate communion together, just like the church has been doing for 2,000 years. At Solomon's Porch, we honor tradition, and we bend it just a little bit. So if you grew up in a tradition that is the common cup, we have the common cup right over here. If you grew up where you didn't have the little shot glasses of grape juice, you use the real wine, we have the wine right here. We have different stations throughout, and we serve each other. We read this together, and then we come back together, and the lines that we use to each other as we serve is, "May the life of Jesus be within you." And then you answer, "And also in you." So let's read this together. We take communion by serving and eating bread and wine together in community with the followers of Jesus around the world throughout all ages. We enter the mysteries proclaiming and having the faith of Jesus as the Messiah, whose life, death, burial, resurrection, ascension, and sending show the love of God for the world, free us from sin, and initiate the kingdom of God in our world in new ways, for the benefit and blessings of all the world. Stand up and serve each other.
He walks across the room, and his tears they sing the score. Dreams are rolling out there on the floor, and she gathers them all again and asks what are they to do. And he can't seem to turn around and choose. Everything to lose, everything to lose, and his heart just can't console. That he could bear to leave her all alone. So he crawls to his knees, bleeding heart is broken through, and I just lost everything to lose. Everything to lose. Everything to lose. Hush now, dry your eyes. I can't give up on you. 'Cause of everything I choose. Yeah, yeah. Everything that I choose.
I was like, I got nothing.
Take it easy.
Our little sweeties head out of the room at this point because it helps their little bodies to have a much better place and situation. So our toddlers and preschoolers, they relocated, and they're going to come back and join us in a minute. And this is also when the 6th graders through 12th graders, the 612 group, head down to your 612 area. Ha. Thank you.
The old man walked the memory, and he walked them all. They're haunted by an orphan's pedigree, a whispered call. Felt it like we feel a melody, back and forth believing anything, up and down again on Mary Street, since the fall. Dirty gown and a pair of feet was all she saw. Reaching out with what she left in her, blacking out just as it came to her. Oh, my soul. Oh, my soul. The ending happily is getting old. The kids are gone, the baby's married, the house is sold. The makings of a great old tragedy, and the country's cold. The rain came down in shiny tapestry, no place like a fractured family. Oh, my soul. Oh,
Chanel, and I'm going to invite you to be a part of what our community does throughout the week here at Solomon's Porch. We meet here on Sunday nights, but we also do a lot of other things as a community, and we'd like it if you would join us. If you want to get this information in your email box, you can fill out this purple sheet, which you'll find in a box that looks like that. There's one over there, and I believe there's still one by the door over here. And then you'll get an email every Monday, which will give you this information. Does anyone want to host community dinner this week? We have a sign-up sheet. You can find it online, and you could also probably just tell Doug or any number of people if you're interested in signing up to host. But we do have little holes, and it seems like we've had a lot this fall and this winter. But if you want to host, it's pretty easy. It's kind of a potluck thing. People come over and bring food, and it's a lot of fun. So if you have any interest, you can let us know now, or come find somebody who looks like they know what they're doing around here, and we'll get you signed up. It'd be a great opportunity to get to know people if you haven't. Jesse, is Jesse around? Practicing spirituality. So practicing spirituality, it looks like this is something that Jesse Crone is putting on starting on Thursday the 7th of February at the porch at 7 p.m. Open to all interested in exploring spiritual practices personally and within a small group. So if you have any interest in that, you can contact Jesse and she can let you know more about it. Date night yoga.
Okay, so we have a yoga studio downstairs. It's a beautiful space, and it's a space that we try to cultivate self-awareness in yourself, obviously, but also with other people. And this class is particularly designed for people who have a significant other or partner. And if you want to come, we try to create space in that class for you to connect with one another, and it really is a lovely time. So if you want to come, it is this Friday, 6:30 to 8 p.m. We'd love to see you.
Great. And you want to talk about this as well, Shelley? Oh.
So this Saturday I'm teaching a workshop at the sanctuary, just in time for the new year about setting intentions. So not choosing like New Year's resolution, like I want to lose 5 pounds or be better parents or whatever. Just really working with the idea that intention is powerful and using that as a grounding anchor. So I would like to see any of you there if you have any questions. It's going to be a 3-hour workshop. Half of it discussion and journaling, and then the other half just practicing it.
And then I'll say something about the other ones. I don't see Amanda here. So Amanda's going to do a workshop also downstairs on the 19th of January, and it's going to be on weight loss. It's an amazing price because it's also a 3-hour class, but it includes a full meal that you will only participate with making part of it. We're not going to put you to do too much work, but it will be a full meal and a great time to end the afternoon. So if you're interested in that or know people, please just send them to our website under workshops. We would love to see them.
And Amanda's a personal trainer as well as a yoga instructor, so she's got that dual function.
Yes.
Loaves and fishes. Thanks, Andrew. Monday night art group figure drawing. I know Carol mentioned this last week. They're going to be doing some figure drawing. Brian, did you want to mention it?
Yeah, Carol just wanted me to say something about this. Invite everyone to learn how to draw. Some of us can't come and read books with us, but I'll probably do it. So you're welcome to come.
So you're looking for people to draw, but also people to sit for the drawings, right? And these aren't nudes? All right. You aren't expected to be nude or anything like that. Is it optional? But could you? I mean, if you wanted. All right. Pop-ups. Anyone? Jackson.
The last one on week since Christmas, I say this past couple weeks, a lot of you guys have been praying for my family and my grandma. She's been sick, and this past week we lost her here on Earth, and she's probably the funniest woman I've ever met in my life, and I just thank you guys for loving on her. And she spoke super highly of this place and always asked about people here, and yeah, thank you.
What was your grandmother's name?
Marianne.
Marianne. So do you want to take a minute? Is that okay? And just pray for Andrew's family. I'm not good at this. Does anyone want to lead this? All right. So if you want to come around, Andrew and Janelle, I know it's hard to lose somebody that you love, and we can do this silently. And if somebody would like to pray out loud, that's great. Otherwise, let's close up.
Andrew and Janelle, I just offer up my prayers and my hugs to you and for your grandmother Mary, who I came to know her at the porch and loved her dearly, know how much she meant in your life. And I just pray that in the weeks to come that her memories are with you and that surrounds you with love and healing. In Jesus' name.
These are some things that happen every week at the porch. Mondays we have art discussion group. They're doing drawing this week. Tuesday men's breakfast over at Sun Street Bread, and 7:30 sermon discussion group. If you want to be a part of crafting the sermon that's going to happen here in a few minutes, you can go to that. Wednesday play group this week is at the MIA. No community dinner unless somebody happens to sign up, and if so, that'll be in the email. Sunday 9:30 is yoga and prayer downstairs. Gatherings 5 and 7 p.m. And every week after the 7 p.m. gathering, a lot of people go to Chipotle. So if you'd like to get to know people, that's a really great way to do it. All of this is available on our website, and we hope to see you there.
And I feel alone, still afraid, and it seems hope's gone away. And I feel shattered and scattered, and I can't find the words to pray. I need to be lost in your arms. Lost in your arms. I wanna get lost in your arms. That's where I wanna be. When my heart seems to fail and my feet they get the best of me, and I feel broken, no words spoken can bring me up from my knees. I need to be lost in your arms. I wanna be lost in your arms. I wanna be lost in your
this conversational style sermon, but our little ones head off and they go to the same place all the time. And Alice was asking that, if you're going to the same place. And yes, you are. So the kindergartners and the first graders and the K1 clubbers, and then the second graders through fifth graders, and they have stuff they do and magical things that happen over there, and they have all kinds of fun. And in here we have this sermon conversation that we do together. On Tuesdays, as you heard in the announcements perhaps, we do the sermon creating together. If you'd like to come on Tuesday, you'll be helping Carla. She will be leading the sermon next Sunday. We have a rhythm during the non-summer months of reading entire books of the Bible out loud as our sermon. It's a peculiar little practice. Different churches have different ways to decide what they're going to do for their sermons. You might know this. I was introduced to Christianity in a tradition where sermons were sort of done at the generation, the whim, the sensibilities of the preacher. Like that was their job, right? That they picked a series, and a pastor of those traditions would often sneak away in the late summer or early fall for retreats or for a week or so and put together a whole preaching sermon thing, and maybe a board of elders or a leadership group or something would give some input on what's sort of happening in our communities. Then there are some traditions where they follow a prescribed list of Bible readings, often called the lectionary. It's this orderly thing. I'm going to be in Memphis next week and doing a sermon at the St. Mary's Episcopal Cathedral, and it's a lectionary-based one. So when I asked them what I should talk, and he goes, "Oh, it's just a lectionary text. Just look it up." And so, like churches all over the world who follow this same pattern will read the same passages, and you pick any one of either an Old Testament or a gospel reading or a New Testament. You do your sermon around that. Well, here at Solomon's Porch, we pick these like big chunks. We'll select a Bible book and read the whole thing, rather than going through it and just pulling out a passage or two, or taking a bigger idea that someone here has, me or someone else, and overlaying that over the top of the Bible and then reading the Bible through those lenses. We sort of engage in reading these collections of writings that have been put together. Now, in the summer months, we do soapbox sermons where anybody in the community can sign up to do a 20-minute, 10-minute sermon. But during the rest of the year, we typically do these. And then on Tuesday nights, we sort of get a vibe, or I sort of suggest it feels like we should maybe read something along the line of a gospel, which we're going to start tonight. We're going to read the Gospel of Mark. So about once a year or so, a year and a half, we try to read Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. And then, we sort of pick our way that way. So we end up with, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15, 18 week like rhythms where nobody in the room necessarily has decided that's what we want to talk about. We're going to talk about the things that these ancient writings have put together. So we're going to do the book of Mark. I don't make these. I just look up on Google Images the Gospel of Mark and then try to find an image that I think would go with that. So I don't know why it says the life and ministry of Jesus. Some other graphic designer did that, and it's on the internet, so it must be free, so I took it. No, Courtney, that's not true. Thank you, yes. Yes, she's taking a photo right now to do with whatever she does with it. So, this week, a little conversation about Mark. We typically will do this when we start a new book. Ask all of you, what do you already know about this book? What's already in your heads? When you heard we're reading the Gospel of Mark, what sort of comes to mind? Did you have something right off the bat, Heather? Yeah. Yeah, so there's 4 of them, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're ordered, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, perhaps not by their date of writing, even though some people suggest that they thought Matthew was written first. But yeah, many people do suggest that, don't they? That Mark is the shortest. Heather, do you have any thoughts on why people say that about Mark? Do you know what that was about? Yeah, right. Do you know why people think Mark was the first one? If you know that, why was it the earliest written one? Anybody have a Timmy? So there's three of them that that go together. They're more synonymous with one another. So people who study the Bible call them by a set, the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then John is a little different than those, like Sesame Street. One's not like the others. So they call these three the synoptic, like they're more synonymous, more similar to one another. Yes, they tell them in this narrative style, and they're borrowing from one another. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, nice. Anybody else? Input on why? Yeah, Riley? Yeah. So there's people who have decided, look, those three Gospels, they're a lot alike, and then John, the one that's a little bit different, it seems like they're all borrowing from some other source material as they put together their writings, and they're trying to figure out what came from Matthew, what came from Mark, or what came from Luke, or what came from this other source. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, there's these strange little, sometimes people call them these strange little pericopes. Like you'll do a story where there's crossing a lake, feeding of 5,000, crossing the lake, having a confrontation, then feeding the 4,000, crossing a lake and having a confrontation with a different group of people. And it's laid out in this really interesting way that if you study this kind of thing, you might notice. Now, a casual reader might just blow over that kind of thing, but if you were to structure it out, you begin to notice that there's some structure to the Gospel of Mark. People also suggest it's one of the earliest writings because it's the shortest. Follow this line of thinking for that argument. It was the first one, so it told all the stuff they knew at the time, and then the later ones started to add more detail, more interpretation, more fleshing out of those stories. So some people like to argue that Mark's gospel was the earliest written one, primarily because it's the shortest. It doesn't include certain things. It doesn't have a birth narrative at all. We'll talk about that a little bit tonight. It doesn't even have resurrection appearances at the end. There's 3 additional endings to the Gospel of Mark, but it doesn't have a birth narrative at the beginning, and it doesn't have resurrection appearances at the end in the same way. Then other Gospels have those, so the idea is, well, those parts of the story then were added in later. To many people's minds, that makes more sense rather than when someone put together Mark, they dropped those things. So had Matthew been written first, then the author or the curators of the Gospel of Mark would have had to drop those narratives, and so the sensibility would be they put them back together. These are the kinds of things that people talk about when they try to figure out some dating on books of the Bible. Other things you know about Mark already.
Well, I know there's a thing about the 4 Gospels, I don't remember, where like each one is like establishing something about Jesus. Like Matthew's kingship, right?
Yeah.
Isn't Mark's humanity? Like there's like each, I mean this is like a theory thing.
Yeah.
Like each gospel like establishes like, sets out to establish something about Jesus. And I think isn't Mark the humanity of Jesus, is that right?
Yes, I think I've heard that people would say the same thing. In fact, they even assign animals to each of the Gospels. Have you ever seen that? There's like these iconic logos that come out of the book of Ezekiel, the opening chapter of the book of Ezekiel. Just, it's very similar to like the book of Revelation on the language it uses. And it describes like this creature with 4 heads and 4 sets of wings and male feet on the top, but then like hoofs on the bottom, all this kind of stuff. And these 4 heads, people in the 2nd, 3rd centuries started to apply to the Gospels. So Mark often has a lion as the sort of icon for it. And that gets kind of interesting to think about how early communities in, 2,000 years back would have organized their telling. They're not going to do what we're going to do, which is click through and read off of a screen where everybody reads the words. They're not doing that. So they used other ways to sort of narrate the story. What else do you know about Mark already? Yes.
I can't remember exactly, but I think Mark is, I think at the end of a lot of these stories, Jesus says, basically like, don't go tell them, don't go spreading this around.
Yeah.
And I always find that curious. I've never heard an explanation as to why, but I've always noticed
In Mark. In fact, I'm going to show you three things that I think might be an interesting way to read through Mark, and one of them is called the Messianic Secret, which is this thing, that Mark has lots of places where Jesus is saying to people like, now don't tell anybody who I am. And the disciples don't know who they are. And there's some interesting theory as to why that is that we'll chat about a little bit tonight. But yeah, it's the gospel where you hear about that kind of stuff. Like, quiet, we don't want everybody knowing this. And if you've come from a tradition where you thought, I thought gospel meant good news and proclaiming the good news, why does a gospel that's proclaiming the good news tell everybody to be quiet? Why is that happening? What's with all that? So we'll chat about that in a bit if you want. I knew you were going to bring this up, and I almost apologized at the start, but in a row, back to back. Yeah. Yeah, we did, like in a summer, back to back. It was crazy. We read through it once and said, don't say anything or notice anything that would be in sort of black print if you have one of those Bibles. Just the narrative. Drop the words, just what do you see in the narrative. Then the next time we did it by only talk about the other things. So, and then we haven't touched the book of Mark since, and that was almost 8 years ago. So we sort of had a, you know how people get like a gluten intolerance that builds up because they eat too much bread and then they have to take off for a while? We've been away from the Gospel of Mark for a long time because we overdid it one summer. Yeah, it's crazy. All right, anybody else, things you know about the Gospel of Mark already? Anybody never heard anything that you can remember coming out of the Gospel of Mark? Anybody like, I have no actual particular memory out of Mark itself? Nothing wrong with that at all. You're going to hear it if you're around here. All right, so a couple of things. If you'd indulge me on nerding out for just a minute in some kind of new sciences stuff. It struck me a couple of times this week in thinking about this that one of the issues you have whenever you're reading through books of the Bible, which we do around here, or whether you're studying it for your own personal reading or something, is trying to decide what do they have to do with each other, right? So we read the book of Kings, first installment from the Old Testament, book of Kings. Then we read the book of Romans. Now we're reading the Gospel of Mark. And there's this sensibility that a lot of us have, this kind of tendency to want for this collection of 66 books of the Bible to tell the same story and to sort of be continuous, right? It's nothing odd about someone wanting that. You'd like to open up in Genesis, start reading, finish up at the end of Revelation, and feel like there was a continuous story all the way through. The problem is you read this stuff and you're like, it doesn't sound anything like came out of Kings. In fact, it sounds totally opposite of what we read in Romans, and that creates a real difficulty. Here's the nerding out part. That wasn't. In science, especially in particle physics, one of the big developments 115 years ago was to begin to say that matter, that things, hard things like a table, is not actually a continuous piece of matter, right? So some of us were taught or thought that the reason you can put your finger into water but not into a table is because there's more space in between the little hard balls of water or something, so you can stick your finger through it, right? So there was this notion that matter was continuous. People that study physics and all of this began to say, actually, the way things are made is that there is electricity, there is energy, everything made up of it, electrons, protons, neutrons, quarks, all this. They're interacting with one another. And they're interacting not as one continuous piece of wood, but as separate little packets interacting with one another. Separate little granule pieces, separate quanta. Quantum physics means things are in little packets, and those little packets are interacting with each other, and what makes something firm or hard or matter is the interaction of the protons, electrons, neutrons, and so on. So the difference between electricity and matter is just the difference of how the electrons, protons, neutrons are interacting with each other. The power is in the interaction, not that it's made up of something different. Air and water and energy and light and electromagnetism and table are a configuration of interaction. So, I think that stuff's really awesome. If one thinks about Bible books, narratives, as one continuous piece, then you end up with this struggle, because what you read here is not the same as what you're reading here, and you say to yourself, it just doesn't hold together. But if you think about it in terms of being quanta, packets, or, to borrow a less nerdy word, digital, digits, interacting with one another, then the issue is not how similar is Mark to Romans, or to Kings, or to Revelation, or to Matthew, but what is the interaction between these different narratives, and where is the power found in their engagement? So it's a different way to orient our thinking about it. So I have this favorite little video that I like to show when I go around and do little talks on spirituality and quantum physics stuff. So I'm only going to show you 1 minute of it because I think it's pretty cool. All right, so it goes like this.
This is analog. This is digital.
Analog means continuous.
This is analog. This is digital. This is analog. This is digital. If it is continuous, it is analog. If it is granular, it is digital. The current trend in audio, video, and communication technologies is to go digital. Instead of a continuum of color in video devices, we are limited to some finite number of colors. Instead of a continuous picture, our photo is divided into pixels. Instead of just any frequency in audio, we are limited to specific steps. This is very much like the universe in the realm of the small. The entire universe went digital about 14 billion years before we thought of it. Space, time, energy, momentum are all granular. There are only certain specific values allowed, and this granularity is accurately described by quantum mechanics.
All right, so I think we should read the Gospel of Mark in a digital-like way. That it's one of the quanta, it's one of the packets. It's saying something. And there's some real power in what it says in relationship to what's happening in your life. There's something interesting about what the Gospel of Mark says in relationship to what Christian theology has been. There's something interesting about what the Gospel of Mark says compared to some of the other writings at different times interpreting that book. Rather than seeing the world as a continuous process of sameness and analog flow, we should see it as interplay between all of these elements. So your life, your experience, your spirituality, your assumptions will come into interaction with the way the Gospel of Mark tells the stories. And so will the other Gospels. So what you see over time in Christian theology and in Christian life and Christian practice is people trying to make sense of these granular little pieces and how do they interact with one another. So a couple of things as we read Mark. Some people think that Mark was written by a guy named John Mark. If you follow some scholarship or read some commentaries or read things on the internet, you might think the Gospel of Mark got its name because there was a guy who traveled with Paul named John Mark. And for a long time, and in some communities, they interpreted the Gospel of Mark as being written by a guy who traveled around with Peter, and with Paul, and he was writing down what those people saw and what they said other people saw. So some people want to put that authorship really, really early with one of the guys hanging around with the people who saw stuff happen. Then there's other folks who think, no, it was more likely written early 2nd century, maybe early 1st century in Syria, of all places. Now, Syria winds up in our news, and so as we see the things happening in Syria, or as you talk to Amber, who lived there with Ben, you will then have to interact the writing, if you buy this theory, the writing of the Gospel of Mark from that location, inside that culture, inside those places. So, depending on who you think wrote it, whether it was a community of people later who were gathering up resources from varieties of places to put together a gospel, or if you like the idea that it's a guy who knew the guys who saw that stuff happen, writing it down, will be one of the factors at play in how you read this, and what you do with it, and how you hear it. What I mean by that is, if you're hearing it from a 2nd century or late 1st century reading, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, somewhere in there. If you're reading it that way, then the questions become, what were the people of that time wondering, thinking, dealing with that would have made this telling of the gospel make particular sense to those people? Right? So you know, one of the other writings, John's gospel, there's this two little places where the writer says, I didn't write down everything. Ain't nobody got time for that. I wrote down the things that sort of made sense to these people in this place at this time to make this argument. So if as a reader you're hearing it as, oh, now I'm not only hearing the story, but I'm hearing the story as told in a particular way for a particular reason. It now causes us to ask, what's the interaction, what's the interplay? I actually buy the second theory more than it was written down by the guy who traveled with the guys who saw the things happen. All right, three big ideas that I just want to taint your mind with before we read the Gospel of Mark on its own. Idea number one, Corey brought it up earlier, it's watch for this thing called the messianic secret. There's all these places where things like this are said. Okay, so I'm going to flip through about 4 of these. If somebody wants to be the reader for these, just shout out.
Going into the tomb, they saw a young man in a white robe seated on the right side, and they were startled. But he said to them, "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He isn't here. Look, here's the place where they laid him. Go tell his disciples, especially Peter, that he's going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there, just as he told you." Overcome with terror and dread, they fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid.
This is how the Gospel of Mark ends. The women go to the tomb, they see it's empty, and then they don't tell anyone. And then there's 3 other endings. So you can read in almost any Bible saying that alternative ending, alternative ending, alternative ending. It's like the movie Clue. So there's 3 other endings. This is how the sort of base one ends, the base book of Mark. So why does it end with the women seeing this and then not telling anybody? This notion of the messianic secret would suggest that the reason these kinds of inclusions are in the book of Mark is that in the early 2nd century, early or late 1st century, Christianity was having to explain how come everybody didn't know about this already. Put yourself in the end of the 1st century, you're like, hey, 60 years ago there was a dead guy and he didn't stay dead. And then people are like, why wouldn't everyone know that? How come Jesus didn't say he was going to do that? Why didn't Jesus just come out and say to everybody, look, here's what you're about to see happen? And why doesn't he get all Chris Angel mind freak about it and be like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk over there, I'm going to levitate, and then you're all going to see, He doesn't, right? This stuff sort of spills out, people kind of know it. Well, the theory of messianic secret is that in the early centuries, Christianity's big question included, why didn't everyone know about this? So if the Gospel of Mark is put together in a way that says, oh, because there was all kinds of reasons to be afraid, and we don't want to be afraid anymore. We're now going to come out with this story. We're now going to share these things. So that's how Mark ends. Here's 3 or 4 other examples, kind of things that Corey was probably thinking about from the book of Mark. This is how it ends, and these are all, this next one's from chapter 1.
Who's the man in the white robe?
Like an angel. Yeah, some translations would say an angel. Some say a boy. Some say a man. Interesting way to say it, isn't it? Okay, I think this comes from the first chapter. So the first chapter has, he's telling the demons, be quiet. I don't want anyone to know who I am. And the end of it is, and the women didn't tell anyone because they were afraid. So now the book of Mark is telling a really different story than Matthew, right? Matthew starts with, and then angels show up, and then there's shepherds out in the field in Luke, and everybody's heralding it, and guys are coming from across the across the continent in Asia, and they're coming over like we saw a star in the sky. We know the guy's been born. Not in Mark's telling. In Mark's telling, everything stays quiet. So when you're reading Mark, its little contribution is different than these others. So for some people, they're like, well, then what's the story? Did the people know or didn't they know? Or why is the story told in both of these ways? All right, it goes on like this. Here's another one.
Whenever the evil spirits saw him, they fell down at his feet and shouted, "You are God's son!" But he strictly ordered them to not reveal who he was.
Another one.
Jesus ordered them not to tell anyone about it.
This is after the transfiguration.
As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them not to tell anyone what they had seen until after the human one, Son of Man, had risen from the dead.
Now that Son of Man, I inserted the translation that I used to read this is the Common English Bible, and it takes the phrase the Son of Man and uses the phrase the human one. You'll notice that in the book of Mark, only 2 times does it use the phrase Son of God. Once in the first sentence, and then once later during the crucifixion. The time in the first sentence, which you'll read next week when we just do the straight reading through this, you'll know it's probably good to note that many scholars feel like that phrase "Son of God" was inserted. The phrase used in Mark's telling is the Son of Man, which these translators translate as the human one. So Jesus says the Son of Man, the promised one, the Messiah, is different than Son of God language from 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries. So it gets sort of interesting. All right, here's one more.
When they were alone, the people around Jesus, along with the 12, asked him about the parables. He said to them, "The secret of God's kingdom has been given to you, but to those who are outside, everything comes in parables. This is so that they can look and see but have no insight, and they can hear but not understand. Otherwise, they might turn their lives around and be forgiven."
I mean, seriously, you're reading along in that, you're like, now Jesus is holding out, he's keeping a secret because he doesn't want people to turn their lives around to be forgiven? Why does Mark tell it this way? All of these passages, by the way, the other Gospels don't say it like that. They don't have Jesus being on the down low about all this. They're telling it in a really different way. So there's this notion of the Messianic secret. Here's one more.
He spoke to them only in parables, then explained everything to his disciples when he was alone with them.
So why didn't the whole world know about all this stuff? Well, it had been entrusted only to certain people, and it was a secret. Changes the trajectory of this really significant thing happened and the whole world knows about it. Right? You read books like the book of Acts and other things, and it's like everybody knows about this. There's been the big rumor being spread everywhere. We're just filling in the details. Not the way Mark tells the story. So there's people who say in parts of the world, one of the reasons the authorship for some is put in Syria is in that part of the world, Christianity spread within quiet, secret communication, not big public communication. Not Paul going into Rome and calling for the Roman emperor to come and free him and broadcasting it out loud to everyone. That there are times when Christianity's story is being spread silently and quietly through private networks, not publicly and outright. So Mark's telling is the gospel of telling it quietly, secretly. Interesting, huh? They all tell these different stories. Okay, now there's this idea called adoptionism. You'd have to have really paid attention during that one class in seminary or in Bible class when they wanted to talk about a big council that happened, the Council of Nicaea. So if you know that the Council of Nicaea put out a creed, often known as the Nicene Creed, and they were trying to answer a big question, right? What was the big question that they were trying to answer in the Nicene Creed? Tony's familiar with this one because I heard you do a sermon on this one time. The beginning of that line. You want to do your little spiel on that? Begotten and not made, this whole thing? Yeah. Anybody know the big thing of Nicaea? Was there a time when Jesus was not the Son of God, God, however you wanted to pitch that? How did Jesus become the Messiah? A theory of early Christianity was a thing called adoptionism. Adoptionism would say he wasn't born that way. He became that by obedience, through obedience. So he becomes the Son of God at his baptism when the voice of God says, "This now is my Son with whom I'm well pleased." That's the point. The Gospel of Mark contributed to this theory because the Gospel of Mark doesn't have a proclamation of a birth narrative. It instead, in the beginning of the Gospel, the very first thing is John the Baptist comes heralding the way, and the next thing, you'll read this next week, we'll read a little snippet of it now, is Jesus gets baptized. That's when the voice proclaims who Jesus is. So, for hundreds of years, there's people saying something that the big category is given called adoptionism. That the Gospel of Mark wants to say, some would interpret, that's when Jesus becomes God's chosen one, is at that point of baptism. Now, here's how it reads. So this is the beginning of the gospel, and I put the parentheses around God's Son because that's where many people think that addition was made. So somebody wants to read this. This is how the whole Gospel of Mark starts.
The beginning of the good news about Jesus Christ, God's Son, happened just as it was written about in the prophecy of Isaiah. Look, I am sending my messenger before you. He will prepare your way, a voice shouting in the wilderness. Prepare the way for the Lord. Make his paths straight.
And so he announces a stronger one than me is coming about that time. Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee came. John baptized in the river. While he was coming up out of the water, Jesus saw heaven splitting open and the Spirit like a dove coming down on him. And there was a voice from heaven said, "You are my Son, whom I dearly love. In you I find happiness," or in some translations, "I'm well pleased." That little way to tell the story is created a whole theory in the first centuries of Christianity that is categorized often as adoptionism, and the Nicene Creed wanted to put an end to that. So much Christian tradition has gone along without any reference to that because the Nicene Creed got rid of that by saying, no, he was begotten of God and not made like other people were made, and Christianity moved on. But there are some who've never sort of let go of the idea, hang on a minute, Mark wants to tell the story as if this baptism was something significant. Now imagine why that would have been for the first century. If you're trying to say to people, how do you become like Jesus? Well, be baptized and enter the family in the same way that Jesus did, not be made of some other substance, right? So it becomes an interesting theological idea for Gentiles. All right, so one more thing, because now the kids are back and playtime is over. Yeah.
And also, just briefly, it's much more in keeping with the Old Testament because you think God continued
Moses, Abraham.
Only one that
Yeah.
from his creation is God's chosen one. Every other covenant is from God choosing the most righteous person.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, interesting. Right, it fits that typology in the way that you see other people being picked. All right, one more idea that comes out of this is the whole notion of the kingdom of God. You'll read about this later. Jesus, this right at the also in chapter 1. John is arrested. Jesus comes to Galilee announcing the good news, saying, now is the time. Here's the kingdom. Here comes the kingdom of God. Change your lives and hearts. Trust the good news. And so Jesus introduces kingdom of God language, which I think sits in contrast to kingdom of David language that you see through the Davidic promise of Solomon's temple, and the kingdom of Caesar, which is what Rome is. Jesus then proclaims this kingdom of God thing. So, all right, all that to interfere with our reading of the book of Mark. Maybe you'll be noticing messianic secrets and adoption-like language and kingdom of God type of language all the way through. So, anybody have a last thing you want to say?
would the secret thing be the start of the control of the story?
Oh, interesting. Is the secret part, is that the beginning of people trying to control the story? Yeah. You can imagine also that for Gnostics, if you know that category of thinking, Gnostics are people that had private knowledge, special knowledge that transformed them spiritually, that something like a gospel around secrets would have been really powerful to that kind of community. That you had to be an insider for it to have made any sense. But it could be the start of that. Yeah. All right, we better sing because the kid...
I want to sing. Spirit teaches, hands within us, enter our homes. Humbly speaking, she will see fit, teacher of the soul. Lean into the throne, peace never leave you alone. God before us, active round us, often moving stone. Together send for justice, no matter where we roam. Lead into the throne, may peace never leave you. Consider what we've been shown. Spirit, understand our own. Stay in peace.